Welcome back to the Clinch Fight Podcast. You're listening to part 2 of our review of the top 10 heavyweights according to Ring Magazine as of March 2021. In the last episode, we had a look at fighters 10 through to 6, including the likes of Michael Hunter, Joseph Parker, and Mexican Andy Ruiz. We evaluated where we thought they stacked up in the division, dream fights we'd like to see, and evaluated how far we think they can go in the rankings. This week we're hoping for more of the same, except we will now be looking at the elitist of the elite. We'll be looking at fighters 5 through to the champion right at the top. Joining me as always is my co-host Michael O'Donnell. If you enjoy the podcast, please feel free to follow us on Twitter at _clinch. That's Y_clinch on Twitter. And be sure to turn on notifications to be informed of future episodes. So without wasting too much time, let's jump right in. Okay, so coming in at number 5, Luis Ortiz. Fought for the WBC twice against Deontay Wilder. Couldn't get it done, but did push Wilder, admittedly, to the brink, down on basically every judge's scorecard until he got the knockout. Where does Luis Ortiz go now, Mike? Where do we see him going? He's not going to get any better. I'm not sure if it's really marketable to see him fight Wilder again in the WBC. Where would you like to see him fight?
Yeah, it's a funny one with Luis Ortiz. He's 41 years of age. He's challenged Deontay Wilder already twice for that WBC belt. Came up short. In both fights, I thought, he performed well. He gave a good account of himself. He was probably winning both fights, in my eyes anyway, apart from the knockdowns, especially in the first fight. I thought he was up on the cards. I thought he was getting better Wilder in the exchanges. He was really outboxing him, kind of similar to how Tyson Fury was in that first fight, but the knockdowns kind of evened it up in that performance. Where I see Luis Ortiz going, really, it's at his age, just the kind of the right fights at the right time. He needs to really pick carefully how he's going to get back to that top world title contention, if that makes sense. If I'm honest with you, we're looking at Charles Martin rated at number 2 with the IBF. That could be his best route, personally. I'm not sure how... is Luis Ortiz ranked in the IBF somewhere?
That's the only problem. Luis Ortiz, as far as I can see, isn't ranked by the IBF. However, he does sit in at number 6 on the WBA. So, right. I don't know, assuming AJ and Fury are tied up for a little while with their super fight, if word is to be true and that's the next fight to happen, he could potentially we got Mahmoud Shah sitting in at the WBA regular champion. If he could somehow squeeze his way into a regular championship fight there, then, he's still technically a champion, but it's hard to see him at his age squeezing his way into a title fixture again. At his age now, you just wonder, does he just go for the money fight? Sure, he had 2 fights against Deontay Wilder, but Deontay Wilder wasn't exactly the superstar he is now. I mean, as we said in the previous podcast, until he fought Tyson Fury, no one really knew, especially stateside, no one knew who the fuck he was.
I completely agree with you where you said that. Does Luis Ortiz go for the money fight or try and get a world title shot? Personally, I think he's fought twice for the world title. I think he's lost that opportunity now, in my opinion. I think he needs to chase the money fights now. I think Luis Ortiz probably made a good purse against Wilder, but however, I think, is it enough for him to live the rest of his life, to secure his family's future's life, and that makes sense, his ancestors for the years to come? I think he really needs to now kind of make the most of any opportunities that comes his way and chase those money fights, mate. Wherever the money fights come, that's where he needs to go. World titles, I think they're out of the question now, especially as you said, with aging Fury tied up now for the next couple of years or so. He needs to really fight as many top contenders as he can and just make as much money as possible before he retires, because how many fights has he realistically got left in him, Luis Ortiz?
Well, he did.
Depends on the level, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, he turned pro very late on. He turned pro about 32. So, you know what they say, it's not the age, it's the miles on the clock. So it'll be interesting to see how long he can go on for. The problem with Luis Ortiz as well is that he's such a terrible fight for anyone in a division, I think. He's a southpaw. We spoke about Usyk in the last episode. Not many southpaws at that elite level in the heavyweight division. Dynamite in each hand, just really, really well put together, will just really, really push you. He does, I think we saw in the Wilder fight, he does tend to wane a little bit later on. But to be honest, I really don't know how good Luis Ortiz is. His best fight again is against Bryant Jennings, who seems to be doing the rounds with a lot of these fighters. But that's like such a massive gap between Jennings and Wilder. It'd be interesting to see how he does against these kind of middle bound fighters, these ones lingering around the top 10 of the Ring magazine. Luis Ortiz is very much a gatekeeper to these elite levels, as we can see. But for Ortiz, there's you wouldn't want to fight Michael Hunter. You wouldn't want to fight Usyk, really. Do you know what I mean? What do you have to gain from it? He's just an awkward. He's a very difficult one to sort of put your finger on.
Yeah, I think he has the attributes needed a heavyweight. He's got for a 42-year-old man. He's got fast hands. He demonstrated his quick hands in the last performance he was in. Looked pretty good in that fight. He's, like you said, he has dynamite in both hands. He's a southpaw. He's not a small heavyweight. He's about 6'4". I think he roughly weighs around 17, 18 stone. He's a big boy. I really do think he could cause problems for anyone, and he's not really a desirable fight for others. But at the same time, in his situation, he's also got to pick what the right fights are for him. So it's a really tricky one for him at this stage of his career. He needs the money fight. However, other opponents are going to look at him and think, do I need Luis Ortiz? So it's really difficult for Luis Ortiz at the moment. And it's going to take a good promoter. He's advised by Al Heyman. Al Heyman's really got to convince his boxers that is it worth stepping up to fight Luis Ortiz. That's the problem.
Sits at number 5 in the Ring rankings. Do you think that's justified?
I mean, in terms of skill set and the problems he could cause all these heavyweights and the performances he had against Wilder in those fights, the success he had, possibly. But in terms of the names on his record, the wins on his record, probably not. Really, his best win is Bryant Jennings, who is a B category fighter. Who is Luis Ortiz beat in that top 10 Ring magazine ranking that we're looking at now? Yes, he performed well against Deontay Wilder and gave him problems, but ultimately he fell short.
It's hard for me to justify him being above Andy Ruiz. Now, sure, Ortiz went and knocked out his last opponent in 45 seconds or whatever, but who was it? It was Alex Flores. Who the fuck is Alex Flores? I couldn't tell you. Maybe
that's the name I was looking for. That's
maybe
the name.
Maybe you can enlighten me, Mike. Yeah, exactly. But Ruiz, as overweight and as lackluster as he has seemed against AJ in the last fight, he went there and if we're calling, say Fury, AJ and Wilder these sort of A-star category fighters, these elitists of the elite, Ruiz went there and beat one of them. Do you know what I mean? He got it done. Sure, he lost in the rematch, but he did the one thing that Ortiz really couldn't do. So, in my mind, it depends. Are you as good as your last fight, or are we doing this depending on sort of the legacy and the records? Really, I don't know. It's definitely up for debate, but for my money, I think Ruiz deserves to be higher.
I agree with you, mate. I think you're absolutely spot on. Luis Ortiz, like I said, he hasn't got that credible win on his record, in my opinion. He's got all the skills, and on his day, I think he could perhaps beat boxers outside of that AJ, Wilder, Fury bracket. I think he could probably get success at on his day. Mm-hmm. However, the facts are he hasn't got a win against any of those. And for me, you're right. I think he doesn't deserve to be higher than an Andy Ruiz, in my opinion.
Okay. Moving on. Coming in at number 4, back to Britain, it's Dillian White. Got a big fight coming up against Alexander Povetkin on Saturday, March 27th. Mike, can Dillian get it done in the rematch?
I believe he can, but the tactics they've got to be adjusted a bit. I think in that fight with Povetkin, he was busting him up, really, let's be honest. He knocked him down. He was battering him, let's be honest. And what happened was Dillian White, he got too excited and he walked in to the experience and ferocious uppercut of Alexander Povetkin. That's what happened. He got excited. He tried to take him out. He thought his man was hurt. And experienced Alexander Povetkin dipped to that left side and gave him an uppercut straight from the gods. And that's all. That's all they wrote. And that's what happened. And I think in the rematch, Dillian White's got to make sure that doesn't happen. He's got to stick behind that jab. He's got to do what he was doing prior to him getting excited and overeager. If he has to win boring, he's got to win boring. Stay behind that jab. You're the bigger man. Use your attributes and beat the older bloke who is more experienced than you, but the man you also had a lot of success against prior to that knockout.
There's no doubt in my mind that Dillian's the better boxer, but it's just that we've got to deal with the psychological barrier as well now, though. He's already been knocked out badly by Povetkin. Sure, White's been knocked out before and come back, as we saw with the AJ fight. Do you think that'll play a factor going into this one?
In terms of rebuilding after
getting knocked out badly by Povetkin, and do you think pulling yourself back together? It's only his second loss in his professional career.
Mm-hmm. It's a really tough one, really, because it was a bad knockout. He was knocked out cold, Dillian White, and I am starting to suspect, these heavyweights, let's be honest, a heavyweight top 10, especially in the Ring Magazine rankings, can bang, let's be honest. And it can happen to any of these boxers. We've seen it with AJ Ruiz. We've seen it with Wilder against Fury. Any one of these guys, if they land clean, there's a good chance they're going to get knocked out. However, I think the Dillian White situation, like you said, he has recovered from a bad knockout before. So if you can recover from that previously, you could probably do it again. However, psychologically, it's probably going to play a bit on your mind, I think. Sometimes to win a fight, you do need to kind of take risks and plow forward and try and hurt your man. And against someone like Povetkin, who's so experienced and who's kind of been there and done it, you need to take your chances. And I think that's what Dillian White kind of thought in that first fight. I think he thought that, I've got my man hurt here, and if I don't take him out now, I could get done later in the stretch. So it's a really hard one. Does Dillian White, if he hurts him again, does he plow forward, try and take him out, or does he take his time and allow Povetkin to recover?
But this way,
it's such a tough one.
Povetkin's given him something to think about, to carry that power after getting knocked down yourself, after being pushed up against it. It's always going to be lingering in the back of your minds. For the sake of this podcast, and I suppose inspiring a little bit of debate, I want to entertain the idea that White gets it done against Povetkin. Now, White's been knocking on the door of these, let's say, A-star fighters for so long. Mandatory challenger for the WBC for over 1,000 days. What do you think White will have to do to get into these A-star fights going forward?
Well, first of all, he needs to beat Povetkin. For the sake of his career, for the sake of him maintaining his pay-per-view main event status, he needs to beat Povetkin. See, in order to get, he chased Deontay Wilder for a very long time. Let's not forget that. It was over 1,000 days he was mandatory for the WBC. Is Deontay Wilder going to want to take the risk against Dillian White if he's not a pay-per-view main event attraction? Now, my other question is, if Dillian White loses to Alexander Povetkin again, is Dillian White a pay-per-view fighter still? If I'm honest, I don't think so. I think the reason why Dillian White was pay-per-view in the first place is because people saw him as the best, arguably the best, outside of your big three, I would say. And plus, he's as game as anyone. He wants to fight everyone. He's a warrior. He just wants the big fights, doesn't he? So in other words, he needs to win the Povetkin fight at all costs to maintain his pay-per-view main event status. And then really, he just needs to be given his chance. He needs the chance to fight one of these guys to prove himself that he belongs.
Is Wilder the man?
He's better. If I had to pick a fight for him next with Fury and AJ being potentially tied down for the next 2 years, Deontay Wilder is the fight for him.
Wilder's sitting at number 1 in the WBC rankings. White's been pumped all the way down to number 6 now, though. Do you think Wilder would want that fight? I mean, if it's on pay-per-view, do you reckon the money would entice him, win him over? Or do you reckon he's willing to sit it out for a potential rematch with Fury or, AJ, depending on how that fight goes?
I think, it really depends. I don't know Deontay Wilder in person, but I think it makes sense for Deontay Wilder to fight Dillian White for sure. Yes, Dillian White is ranked number 6, as you said, and he's ranked number 1. But if you look at the fighters below Deontay Wilder, do they make him more money than fighting Dillian White? I don't think so. Dillian White will sell that fight. Though imagine the press conferences with Dillian White and Deontay Wilder. It would be insane. For me, that's the problem. Yeah, I mean, with AJ and Fury tied down, that's the
money fight.
Arguably the second best fight in the division.
I don't know.
Arguably.
If we're going to go down sort of the fantasy route here.
Most marketable in Britain, probably most marketable, I think. A lot of Brits will get behind that.
Mm. The problem with Dillian White is he's ranked number 6 by the WBC. I don't think he's ranked at all. He's not ranked by the WBA, IBF, or WBO. Or, if we want to entertain the idea even further, Alexander Usyk and Joe Joyce fight it out for the WBO interim title. Joe Joyce versus Dillian White is a sexy fight to make. All British heavyweight bout to determine who is the number 3 in Britain. And then that fighter will have one foot in the door to fight the winner of AJ and Fury. What do you think about that?
Yeah, like you said, Dillian White and Joe Joyce would be a very sexy fight indeed. I think just going back to Dillian White in the rankings, that he's only ranked with the WBC or something. Mm-hmm. To be honest, for Dillian White, I don't think the rankings that matter that much for Dillian White. Mm-hmm. I think most people know who Dillian White is. Like I said earlier, he's a pay-per-view attraction. He's got Eddie Hearn. In my opinion, Eddie Hearn is probably the biggest promoter in the world right now. He's got AJ and Canelo. They're the 2 biggest draws in boxing.
I'd agree.
At the moment. Eddie, listen, outside of AJ and Fury, I think Eddie Hearn's capable of getting Dillian White any fight he wants. He's got Dillian White all these big fights in the past, previously. And apart from Wilder, the only one he has managed to get is Wilder. But I think there was more politics involved. That's why that didn't happen. But I think White is capable of getting any fight, really, under Eddie Hearn. If the money's right, Dillian White will get the fight. In terms of the Joe Joyce Dillian White fight, yeah, I mean, that would be fantastic. That would be a really good fight. I think it's a bad fight with Dillian White stylistically, though. I really do. If I was Dillian White, I'd probably try and avoid that. If I was him, I would try and get that Deontay Wilder fight instead of fighting the winner of Joyce Usyk. While you, especially if he comes through Povetkin, while your stock is reasonably high, I wouldn't go for that, even if there's a WBO interim belt on the line. Listen, if he beats Povetkin, he's a WBC interim champ. So I would try and stay away from the WBO interim winner if I was him, because both of those guys are very capable of beating him. So if I was him, I would chase that Deontay Wilder fight, or even, I don't know, stick around long enough to potentially get the AJ Fury winner. Because I think if he wins that interim WBC belt, very likely to be mandatory for that fight anyway.
He could challenge for the WBA against Mahmoud Shah as well. WBC interim and WBA regular champ on the line. It's only opening up more doors for you, surely.
I mean, if he really, really wants to be a world champion of any sort, then go and fight Shah. Do you know what I mean? If you really want to be a world champion...
I don't want to see that fight, but for the sake of his career, for the sake of adding another quote-unquote title.
Yeah. I mean, in the history books, you'll go down as a WBA regular champ, but if you really want those money fights, which I think is more important, the money than the belts for Dillian White, don't fight Manuel Shah. No one's going to give you credit for it. Yeah, you'll be a WBA regular champ, but everyone knows it's a bullshit belt. That's what it is.
Do you reckon he can make Bridger weight?
No chance in hell. Have you seen the size of Dillian White? Did you not see Dillian White? Hang on. Did you not see the Dillian White on the undercard of the Ruiz AJ fight? He was massive. He was like 20 stone.
You were talking about bullshit titles and it just slipped out. I'm sorry.
He's too big for Bridgerweight. He's massive. Dillian White is huge. I've seen Dillian White in person. The guy is massive.
Okay. Does he deserve to be where he is?
Yeah, I do. I think he does deserve to be ranked that top 5 in the Ring magazine for sure. Listen, he's beaten Oscar Rivas and Joseph Parker, who are both in that top 10. And he's fought AJ. You know, he lost to AJ, got knocked out. But he's fought 3 of those guys who were in the top 10, beat 2 of them, and lost one of them. And lost to arguably, well, you know, he could be the best one, AJ. We don't know yet, do we? He could be the best of the bunch. So, for sure, for me, Dillian White has to be in that top 5 all day long. No debate for me. He's in there.
Okay, then coming in number 3, the man who beat the man. It's the Russian Alexander Povetkin, also 41 years old, much like Luis Ortiz, another one of the oldies. My thing with Alexander Povetkin is Povetkin for both Vladimir Klitschko and AJ, these fights would have made him already rich beyond his wildest dreams. What are you holding out for at 41 years old? What is there left for you to do? Are you realistically going to get another title fight? I know you're WBC interim champ, but are you going to hold out for that? Does anyone want to see that? Where do you think he goes in his career now, Mike?
Do you know what? I think with Povetkin, he's just a warrior. I think he generally loves to fight. I really do. He wouldn't be fight if he didn't love to fight. He wouldn't be fighting nowadays. Let's be honest. This guy isn't skint. He broke like the Russian boxing pay-per-view record or something. I think he has the biggest purse ever from a Russian boxer. I think it was 5.8 million to fight Klitschko. That was just for Klitschko. Let's also, don't forget, he fought AJ at Wembley in a pay-per-view event. That must have done decent numbers, let's be honest. As well, he's also fought Dillian White at a pay-per-view card, which he must have made at least a couple of mil from that.
And now he's got a rematch.
And now he's got a rematch, and the fight's even bigger than the first one.
Exactly.
So, you know, I'm not going to say it isn't for the money, because it clearly is. This guy obviously thinks, I'm still good enough to compete with these top guys. Why not try and make as much money as possible? I still enjoy the sport. I still enjoy fighting. Not sure if he enjoys the training. I don't know him personally, so at his age, the training must be difficult for him at his age. But I'm sure he probably trains smarter rather than harder now. Mm-hmm. However, the guy clearly showed in his last fight he is still capable of beating these guys if they're not 100%, if they take risks that are necessary. He also gave AJ problems, I remember. I think he broke AJ's nose in the fight, in their fight. Yeah, I mean, Klitschko, he's pretty dominated. I think he was knocked down 4 or 5 times in that fight. But, you know, this guy, he's only lost to AJ and Klitschko, as you said. And any other contender they put him in with, he's beaten. So this guy still fancies his chances against anyone. And he thinks, why should I retire if I can still beat these top contenders? Maybe there's another world title fight left in me. And you know what? Your question was basically what the motivation was for Povetkin.
Where does he go?
I'll give you a fun fact, actually. He was the WBA regular champion. So that's not the full version of the WBA title.
That's what Mahmoud Shah is, no?
Yes. So the 2 fights he had that were for the full version of the belts were against AJ and Klitschko, and there was only losses. So maybe he wants redemption and thinking, if I get my next shot at that full version of the world title and win, then I'll go down as a proper world champion. And maybe that's the motivation for him. Maybe. I'm not sure because he's 40, 41, 42.
He's 41.
Maybe he
now.
just wants as much money as he can. Maybe that's probably most likely answer. But I'm just giving you kind of my views on what could potentially be his motive at the moment.
That's the problem with Povetkin, is that he is still competitive. He is still doing the job. I mean, he knocked out Dillian White. He's still doing the business at this elite level. I just feel like both him and Ortiz, sure, they're good gatekeepers into these top bracket fights, but do you think they're holding up the division somewhat?
I mean, I think with Povetkin, I think it's quite unfair to say that because they've put him in ultimately with a top 10 guy and he's not them spark out. So how can we say that he's holding the division up? Because apart from AJ and Klitschko's retired, everyone else they've put in front of him, he's dealt with, hasn't he? So, you know, this guy wants a fair crack like everyone else. He's beaten as many fighters as he can that they put in front of him. So I think he's better than a gatekeeper personally. I think if you want a world title shot, then you need to go through someone like Povetkin. In my eyes, that isn't a gatekeeper. That's a genuine contender you're beating. A gatekeeper for me is someone like beating Chisora to get you in the top 10. Not a world title shot.
I mean,
does that make sense?
There's gatekeepers to different brackets, isn't there? There's
I guess, yeah.
Chisora, who's a gatekeeper to the top 15, but then you've got those like Ortiz, those like Povetkin, whom if you beat them, then you're basically calling for a title shot. That will put you in that elite bracket where you're looking to contend. I don't know. I just don't see Povetkin ever really. And I enjoy Povetkin as a fighter. He always comes correct. He'll put on an entertaining show. I don't ever see him beating one of these elite guys, whether it's AJ, Fury, or even Wilder. Really, do you know what I mean? I think they're just bad matchups for him entirely. He's of that bracket where, you know, the short, sort of powerful, carrying a lot of lard, to be honest, and you know they'll tough it out with you. But someone like Fury, who's just going to dance around you for 12 rounds, I don't ever see Povetkin cracking that code.
I think against AJ, like I said earlier, he had quite a lot of success in that fight. So it really depends on how game one of those three are on the day. If they're not 100%, I think Povetkin, has a chance, especially against someone like Wilder, who technically isn't as good as Povetkin, in my opinion. And if Wilder gets emotionally involved and opens up a bit, I think he could walk onto a good shot of Povetkin. I think Povetkin could cause him trouble. However, if I had to put money on him against any of those top three, I agree with you. I don't think Povetkin wins those fights. But he has a chance. I give him a chance.
Is he ranked fairly?
Yes, I think he is. Because for me, Dillian White was easily top 5 in that division. And he completely iced Dillian White. He didn't destroy him, but he knocked him out badly. So for me, that catapults him up there. If you got the win over the man, then you're in there. However, going back to the point of Andy Ruiz, who has the win against one of those top 3 fighters and was a legitimate world champion, not just a world champion, a unified world champion, held 3 of the major belts. Povetkin has never done that. He's held the regular belt. Does he deserve to be ranked higher than Andy Ruiz?
Arguably.
Probably not. I don't think he does.
If the Povetkin that showed up against White in his last fight shows up against the Ruiz that showed up against AJ in their last fight, there's no doubt in my mind that I think Povetkin takes it to him. Ruiz was overweight in that fight. And, when your best asset is your hand speed and your foot speed and your ability to sort of bob in and out, it's that's the argument that you have to make when evaluating these two fighters. I think you're only as good as your last fight, and I suppose Ruiz really wasn't the man we thought he was. One last question: who would you like to see Povetkin fight? If you're from a fan's point of view.
To be honest with you, I'm going to say something.
If you say
no, actually, do you know what? I was going to say something really boring, and I was going to say, do you know what? Povetkin, he's 42. He's made a lot of money. I would like to see him retire. I was going to say something really boring then. Yeah. However, my man Michael Hunter deserves his rematch. Let's get it on again. It's a terrible fight, Povetkin, at this stage of his career. He probably should stay away from Hunter, But for as a Michael Hunter fan, I would like to see Michael Hunter get that rematch and put things right and get the win over Povetkin.
Povetkin's not going to get any better.
Exactly, but it's extremely unlikely. But just to answer your question, who I would like to see him fight next would be Michael Hunter. Provides whatever happens really with Dillian White, I would like to see him fight Michael Hunter.
Getting up to that elite level now, coming in at number 2. It's the biggest crybaby in championship boxing. It's the bronze bomber. It's Deontay Wilder. We know he has a rematch clause with Fury. Do we see that happening? Do we see that playing a factor going into the future? Or is there even a market for wanting to see that fight now?
With potentially 2 fights that are going to happen with AJ and Fury, probably within the next 18 months or so, I can't see it happening, really, to be honest with you. I think Fury had been quoted to say recently that they tried, after that second fight with Wilder, They tried everything they could to make that trilogy happen while it was contracted within that time frame the supposed contract was running for, and it didn't happen. And of course, the amount of excuses, like you said, Wilder made after the fight with Fury, I think that's created a bit of bad blood and animosity between the two. And I think Fury's thinking, why should I give this guy another rematch when he's basically making out I'm cheating, other things are happening with him. I can't really see that trilogy with Fury happening anytime soon, unless, Fury just wants to continue fighting after the AJ saga, and Wilder looks shit hot going into those, having a big couple of wins in that time frame. That makes sense, and the fans demand it. If people actually think that Wilder actually has a chance against Fury again, then maybe it could happen. I'm not sure, though.
That's the thing. Wilder, it appeared, if you take away every excuse that he's thrown at the fight, Wilder got beat so decisively. I mean, it really kind of, it appears that the writing was on the wall. He seemed to be found out. Fury really pressed him, couldn't fight on the back foot, and just never really got off the ground, really. I think you're right. I think he needs to go out there and demonstrate and make us remember who he is, basically. He needs to go out there and get some good wins under his belt and make himself look and win those fights well before he can start calling out these A-star fighters again. But when you're sitting at number one in the WBC rankings, who do you really want to fight? Do you really want to risk a fighting Usyk, potentially fighting Ortiz again for the sake of, what do you gain from those situations? Having said that, if it's money he's after, there are some tasty
fights
out there for Deontay Wilder in this division at the moment. Again, we talked about Dillian White, why we thought that might be marketable. But as we said in the first episode, you got Andy Ruiz Jr. floating about now. He didn't look particularly special in his last fight. If these two can get a bit of publicity, get a bit of momentum going behind them, they could sell that fight 10 times over, as far as I know. And even if you don't want to touch him, there's always Michael Hunter floating about that number 8 mark in the Ring magazine rankings. Let's find out who is the best all-American fighter in the heavyweight division. What do you think he's after the money fight now, or do you reckon he's just got his eyes set on a title?
If he wants to pursue his career with all the belts potentially tied up again for the next 2 years or so, it's got to be about the money. What else is the motivation for him if all the belts are tied up? And for me, there's two men who can make Deontay Wilder a lot of money, and they're not boxers. On one hand, there's Eddie Hearn, who can offer Deontay Wilder a lot of money to fight Dillian White, providing he comes through the Povetkin fight. If you show Deontay Wilder the money, you will get him in that ring, in my opinion. The other man is Deontay Wilder's advisor, Al Heyman. Al Heyman also manages Andy Ruiz as well. Get Deontay Wilder and Andy Ruiz one fight each before they fight each other. So set up a collision course, build it up, get them to call each other out, and then make the big money fight. Mexico versus America. The two top guys in North America at heavyweight, get them fighting each other. Get both former world champions. One's been beaten by Fury. One's been beaten by AJ. These guys could be the winner of that could be regarded as the next best thing after those two, and could also get the shot at Undisputed next, because they might be the more marketable after they both fought each other. That makes a lot of sense. So these two promoters I've mentioned, they need to get that money out to get Deontay Wilder in the ring, in my opinion. Because Deontay Wilder made a lot of money in those fights with Fury. I think Deontay Wilder does want to be a world champion again, but he needs to sell himself and he needs the right fights.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I remember him talking in the Joe Rogan podcast about sort of his start in boxing, and it was basically because I think he wanted to play basketball, but in order to play basketball, you have to go to college. So his his natural sort of progression was to go into boxing, where you don't need the college system to perform. But he said it was just for the sake of providing for his daughter. So if he still holds that mentality and he's still got that hunger for making as much money as possible, Andy Ruiz is definitely the right way to go. Do you like that stylistically though?
I think so. I think Deontay Wilder's got quite a lot of advantages going into that fight. He's got the height, he's got the reach. I think he's an awkward style for Andy Ruiz. You know, Wilder's very unorthodox. He's very dangly, and he doesn't really box to the kind of technique that you would advise your child to kind of box, but he pulls it off. It's worked for him every time, and it's very hard to prepare for Deontay Wilder. There's no one you can really get like sparring wise to prepare for Wilder, and I do think for Ruiz as well, it's kind of a good matchup because that lack of technique could kind of work in Ruiz's favor. I mean, Ruiz could kind of expose Wilder as well. If you look at the second fight against Fury, if you put Wilder on the back foot, he doesn't really know how to cope with it, and
Ruiz
he can't really
knows how to fight one way. He's only
100%. 100%. You're spot on.
Press you. Yeah,
that's it. And Ruiz has got a good chin as well. I've never really seen Ruiz really hurt. Apart from, AJ knocked him down, but then he got straight back up and took it to AJ. So
yeah, but I don't know, something about Wilder, man. There's a lot of fighters who fought Wilder and thought, oh, he has a good chin, and he make you doubt yourself.
I look at Ruiz and Wilder, and I think it's a genuine 50-50, in my opinion. I really do. I don't think there's a favourite in that fight.
Again, it all depends about the Andy Ruiz that shows up, but if
the best Ruiz against the best Wilder is 50-50.
It's definitely the fight to make. Coming in at number 2, do we agree with that, Mike?
Wilder I think fairly sits at number 2. He was world champion for a long time.
I can't see him anywhere else, to be honest.
I mean, I don't see how Dillian White would go ahead of Wilder. Don't think how Povetkin would go ahead of Wilder. The only two men who I could confidently say are better than Wilder are Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. I think, again, Andy Ruiz might make a case because he's beaten one of those guys and he held 3 belts at one point, but it's the fact that he won the belt, then didn't defend it. The difference is Deontay Wilder had a legitimate world title and defended it like 8 or 9 times, something like that.
Okay, so for our final 2, seen as they are both the champions of the division, I think it's probably best if we analyse these 2 together. It's fellow Brits, Anthony Joshua and Tyson, the Gypsy King Fury. Who's the underdog going into that fight, Mike, in your opinion?
Well, I think based on Tyson Fury's victory over Deontay Wilder, the way he dominated him and really took that belt away from him, I think you've got to say Anthony Joshua is the underdog for sure. I think Anthony Joshua has looked quite vulnerable the last couple of years. Obviously, Ruiz knocked him out in their first fight, played it really safe in the rematch, which suggests, was he being a bit overly cautious at times? Has he got a suspected fragile chin maybe? We're not sure. Also against Pulev, he had Pulev hurt early in the fight, but he didn't really jump on him straight away, which is quite strange. I don't know if he was being overly cautious because of what happened with Ruiz, because obviously when Ruiz knocked him down the first time, he had just knocked Ruiz down. Ruiz had got up and took the fight to him. So maybe he was overly cautious due to that. And I just think there's more of an invincibility in Tyson's mind than AJ at the moment. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, every time I see Tyson Fury in interviews now, he seems so sort of zen. Do you know what I mean? Compared to the guy who beat Klitschko all those years ago, he just seems he's already won in my eyes. I mean, he came back from weighing over 400 pounds, got himself down and won the WBC back. He's already got this legendary status as one of the all-time greatest boxers in my mind. Maybe not one of the best all-time greatest boxers, but one of the all-time greatest fighters, if you know what I mean. The distinction there, the guy who came back from, sort of the pits of depression and obesity and just came back and did it all. It's one of the best comebacks in sports in history, never mind boxing history.
If you're going to kind of evaluate their records to date, I think AJ has the better quantity of opponents out there. He has the more contenders. But if you look at the quality of wins, for example, when Fury beat Klitschko was the 10-year unbeaten champion. He was the lineal champion. He was the man in that division, although there was another belt out there. Klitschko held 3 of them, but he was the man, let's be honest. If you were going to be number 1 in the heavyweight division, you have to beat Klitschko. There was no argument about that whatsoever. And then he did that abroad in Germany. And then he also went to America to fight Wilder twice. And really, he beat him twice. Obviously, the first one was a draw, but for my money and for all the experts as well, they all said Fury really gave him a boxing lesson, just didn't get the decision. Even though he was knocked down twice.
Wilder didn't win a single round apart from the ones he knocked Fury
Apart
down.
from the knockdowns, yeah, that's
even
it.
The last round, even though he almost put Fury out, Fury went on to win the rest of that round. Do you know what I mean?
And I just think what I'm trying to go on to really is those 2 wins, Wilder and Klitschko, probably trump all of AJ's wins, really, even though he has more quantity of opponents, if that makes sense. He's fought more contenders.
Well, Fury's out for so long as well. Do you know what I mean? But it's...
Yeah.
I think looking back on their careers, sure, you might talk about more quantity and stuff like that, but people will only ever remember the big fights. I mean, the casuals will only ever really remember, the Wilders versus Furies, the Klitschko's versus AJ's. All of the rest just seems like filler. Will look like filler compared to sort of those big ticket fixtures. It's hard for me to contend whether, looking at that last fight, it's hard for me to contend whether who the underdog will be going into that. I honestly don't think that the AJ that showed up against Ruiz in the first fight at MSG was the AJ we've come to know and expect. There was rumors of him getting knocked out in sparring in the run-up to that fight, rumors that he was asked to pull out, but Hearn insisting that the fight go ahead. Whether or not believe that, it is what it is. But on the opposite end of that, it's hard for me to really evaluate how well AJ came back from that, because I don't think we saw him against the same opponents in Ruiz, because Ruiz was out partying the weeks before the fight, did show up 20 pounds overweight. Sure, he did the business over Pulev. I thought he did fine in that fight. I'm not going to hold it against him for not going for the kill. Still put him to bed at the end of the day. For me, it's still hard to sort of evaluate the effect that loss on Ruiz will have had on him, because on his day, and AJ is absolute money. And I don't think there's a lot of people saying, "Oh, Fury's going to batter him." I don't think it's quite as clear cut as it is.
Not
but
at all.
If I was AJ though, and I don't think, for the sake of keeping any kind of credibility in boxing in the heavyweight division, I think the fight absolutely needs to happen next. But if I was AJ, I think another tune-up fight, another one of these, if he's got a WBO mandatory challenger or whoever, someone who, just to tune up that little bit before he gets fed to the lions, before he has to go and fight Fury, would probably do him the world of good. But again, the fight has to happen now. There's nothing left for them to prove otherwise.
See, I kind of disagree with you on that one. I think it's actually Fury who needs the tune-up fight going in, surprisingly,
Really?
because Fury last fought against Wilder a year ago now in February, whilst AJ's had the more recent fight against Pulev. And Fury always kind of makes out that activity is so important in boxing. He recently said that he believes Billy Joe needs a tune-up before he fights Canelo. And, he can't say that when he's going to go into the AJ fight potentially without a tune-up fight. And as you said as well, I don't think it's as clear cut as people are making out. People think that all Fury needs to do is turn up and he pretty much boxes AJ's ears off. But, I think if AJ came in with a game plan of just to sit on Fury's chest from the first round and really take the fight to him, it could be very interesting because if he allows Fury to kind of get into his rhythm and use his natural boxing ability, I think AJ will be chasing the fight, and it'll be very hard for AJ to make the adjustments to kind of win that fight. So it's a very interesting fight, and like you said, it needs to happen next. It really does. Both in their prime. I was going to say both undefeated, but actually AJ does have a loss, but he has avenged it. But
Exactly.
they are both 100% in their primes now, no matter how you look at their records.
There's
and
no
it does
reason-
need to happen next.
It depends on Fury's intentions going past this fight. I mean, they could sign on for 2 fights. They could sign on for 3 if they're both too wildly contested.
Yeah.
But it has to happen now. No doubt about that. How do you foresee the fight going? If I gave you £50 note, I said back the winner, where would you put your money, Mike?
It's really hard for me to bet against Tyson Fury because of the wins he's got on his record. Like, to be honest, I think he was such a big underdog against Klitschko. There's nothing that I saw in Fury's career prior to that Klitschko fight that would suggest he would beat Klitschko, and he got the job done. And then Wilder, I've always rated him higher than Wilder, but both of those fights, I just didn't fancy him. Just one due to the inactivity and the comeback he had. It just seemed too much to go straight in against Wilder. I know he had the 2 comeback fights.
Don't doubt it.
But ultimately, the levels he went up from, I can't remember who he fought against Wilder, but the level he went up from that comeback fight to Wilder was just ridiculous. And, he set to the occasion, got the draw.
He still looked a bit overweight.
Then,
look at the physique he showed up for the first Wilder fight compared to the second one.
Yeah.
Dropped a lot.
But then in the rematch against Wilder, for some reason, I just didn't fancy him either. I just thought Wilder was going to put it right and walk him onto a shot. I thought Fury was going to be... I didn't think he'd approach the fight like he did, to be honest. I thought he'd do the same thing and try and outbox Wilder again. And Wilder would eventually get to him and this time knock him out when he gets the chance. But he proved me wrong. So it's really hard for me to go against Fury. I don't think you can bet against him. You really can't. And he's undefeated and he finds a way to win. Or he always makes the right adjustments. Even against Steve Cunningham, he got knocked down in that fight and he bit on his gum shield and turned into a dogfight and found a way to win. That's what he does.
Right. You're absolutely right. He always finds a way to win. If I was posed with the same question, I mean, I'd have to just look at their last fights. For my money, Fury's win against Wilder back in February 2020, best performance of his career, undoubtedly.
It was punch perfect.
It's punch perfect. It was the perfect performance. Yeah. You couldn't ask for any better. AJ just looked a little bit shaky, I guess, against took a little while to ease into it back in front of the British fans, but got the job done.
Yeah, I think AJ looked great against Pulev as well, but I just think, like you said, it just wasn't quite the punch perfect performance Fury had against Wilder.
Exactly.
And I mean, like you said, if you base on their last performances, you probably have to go with Fury all day. And the level he fought at, like we said earlier, Wilder is that A category for us, and Fury demolished him.
Okay, so Mike, the big question to round out this week's episodes: how do you rank them overall? Do we agree with the ring rankings? Do we have any objections? So we got just to reiterate, we got Luis Ortiz sitting at number 5, the Cuban. Number 4, we've got Dillian White. Number 3, we've got Alexander Povetkin, the victor over White last year. Number 2, we've got Deontay Wilder. Number 1, we've got AJ, and the champion sitting at the top, we've got Tyson, the Gypsy King, Fury. How do you foresee that, Mike? How do we rank it up on our clinch?
So my rankings if I was in charge of the Ring Magazine heavyweight rankings, so I'd have Fury sitting at the top. He is the Ring Magazine champion after all. Mm-hmm. So for me, he sits at the very top. I've got AJ behind him. He is, AJ could be the best in division. We still don't know until he fights Tyson Fury. But for me, easily behind Fury in those rankings. Behind AJ then, I've got Deontay Welder. I think he was the man. He's only lost to Fury. He was a champion for quite a long time. And really, for him to slip down those rankings for me, he needs to get beat again, really. And that's why, for me, he stays where he is. I've got Andy Ruiz next in those rankings. I know we haven't discussed Ruiz, but I've taken Luis Ortiz out of them. And I've got Andy Ruiz sitting at number 3 behind Deontay Wilder. just for the reasons we mentioned earlier. He's got that win against AJ. He's held legitimate world titles. After Andy Ruiz sitting at number 4, I've got Alexander Povetkin. He got the win over Dillian White. He's fought some good contenders over the years. He's a veteran of the game. For me, he's top 5. And then sitting at number 5, I've got Dillian, the body snatcher, White. And I think he's been consistent, White. I think he's been fighting the top contenders out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he deserves to be in that top 5. And if or when he beats Povetkin, he will go a place higher for me.
Okay. Say we redo this podcast in 2022. Do you foresee any chopping and changing there? White be ranked higher?
Okay, so what I see White beating Povetkin, going up to number 4.
I see it too. I'm convinced it was, I'm not going to say it's a fluke, but I think the body snatcher is going to come back and do it for the boys.
And hopefully we see Ruiz against Wilder, and there could be a place swap there in my ranking.
Yeah.
Not
those
the official.
3, White, Ruiz and Wilder, I want to see those lot. I want to see them all fight one another. Those, if I could have any dream fight out of all of those we discussed today.
Rather than wait around and sulk about contracts, mandatories, etc. Fight each other.
You've got to fight the best fights, and that's where it's at for my money. I foresee a lot of chopping and changing if they can make those fights happen in the rankings. But
what about your ranking?
My rankings. What, for 2022 or for this year?
No, for this year. Who have you got? Do you agree?
For this year, absolutely. As I stated earlier, I think Andy Ruiz is unjustly ranked in the ring rankings. I mean, it's fair to criticize his last performance. He looked so lackluster. But looking at him recently, I back him to creep back up that list. Get Luis Ortiz out of there. Never held a world title. Never done the business over those top A star level fighters. So he's out. Andy Ruiz, I'll put him. I think there's a case to put him in ahead of White and Povetkin, really, which is exactly what I'm going to do. Just for the sake of creating debate. He's held all of the world titles. I think he beat Joseph Parker. I don't think who's another top level fighter. He's had some good wins over those in the division. Yeah, I'll put White in at number 5, Povetkin number 4, Ruiz number 3, Deontay Wilder at number 2. But I got a feeling Deontay Wilder's going to be a bit lower on the list this time next year. AJ number 1, and none other than the Gypsy King sitting at the top of the throne. Yeah, I think that's a good place for us to see off the work. Unless you have any objections, Mike?
No objections. Just before we go, did you watch the Joseph Parker Jr. Farr fight by any chance?
I didn't, but you're going to tell me all about it.
So it was a very close fight. It was one of the worst fights I've ever seen, just to let you know. It shouldn't be called a boxing match. It should be called the hugging match. The rounds were very difficult to score. I scored some rounds with one or the other being more aggressive or just landing slightly cleaner punches, even a jab or something. I had it a draw, but Joseph Parker got the decision, but quite comfortably. One of the scorecards had him 119 to 109 somehow, which was pretty ridiculous. But I wouldn't have complained either way.
New Zealand's a traditionally corrupt country, Mike. I wouldn't pay much attention to it.
Oh, really? Okay.
No, I was joking. They're like the most...
we'll cut that bit out.
Liberal and well put together country ever. Okay.
Yeah, there we are. It was a crap fight, and Joseph Parker got the victory and remains in the mix.
Remains in the mix. So, well, maybe we'll hear more from him in the near future. Anyway.
Oh, the rumor is he's fighting Chisora next.
There's a fight. That is a fight. Yeah, Del Boy just always. Could we see Derek Chisora creep in to that top 10 Ring Magazine fixture? Be interesting.
Well,
one.
Yeah. Imagine that if Derek Chisora crept into the Ring Magazine top 10.
Can he get out of that gatekeeper status for the top 15? Hopefully, we'll be able to revisit this some way down the line and see how our predictions have fared. Anyway, but I think that'll do us for the rest of the episodes. Again, if you like what you heard and you want to support the podcast, please follow us on _clinch. That's Y_clinch. and turn on notifications to be informed of future episodes. We'll be looking to drop another episode in the very near future. Until then, thank you very much.